Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Munib Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Moscow is ready to boost anti-terrorist potential of Pakistan. At a joint press conference with his Pakistani counterpart Shah Mahmood Qureshi in Islamabad, Lavrov said Russia wants to supply military equipment to Pakistan. He said Russia welcomes normalization talks between Pakistan and India. Meanwhile, Qureshi said Islamabad will continue its role as a mediator in the region. World powers and Iran have agreed to form working groups to discuss Washington's sanctions in a bid to revive the 2015 nuclear deal. At a news briefing, U.S. State Department spokesman called the meeting with the deal signatories in Vienna as a constructive meet. Earlier, Iran's chief negotiator Abbas Araghchi said Tehran is not interested in step-by-step revival of the deal at all. The next meeting will be held on Friday. Iran says its vessel, the Savage, has been targeted near the Djibouti coast in the Red Sea. In a statement, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Saeed Khatibzadeh said the civilian ship was stationed to secure the region against pirates. According to a U.S. media report, the attack was carried out by Israel, keeping U.S. interests in mind. Meanwhile, a Pentagon spokesperson said no U.S. forces were involved in the incident. In Myanmar, at least 8 anti-coup protesters have been shot dead and 20 others wounded by security forces in Sakhaing region. According to a local advocacy group, 590 civilians have been killed in the violence following the February 1st coup. Meanwhile, Indonesia has said the UK will support ASEAN in its effort to resolve the Myanmar crisis. Brazil has recorded more than 4,000 daily COVID-related deaths for the first time as its toll approaches 337,000. India has reported 630 deaths and this year's highest infections as over 115,000 tested positive overnight. In Pakistan, 112 people have lost their lives, while more than 4,000 tested positive over the last 24 hours. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 2.8 million lives and infected over 132 million people so far. And in cricket, Pakistan are 157 for 1 in the third and final one-day international against South Africa in Centurion. The Wizards got off to a cautious yet steady start but lost opener Imam-ul-Haq's wicket at 57 runs. Earlier, the Proteas won the toss and elected to field. The three-match series is levelled 1-1. Well, these were the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. Start from Pakistan, where Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Moscow is ready to boost the anti-terrorist potential of Islamabad. Lavrov was addressing a joint press conference with his Pakistani counterpart Shah Mahmood Qureshi in Islamabad. The Russian foreign minister said Moscow wants to supply military equipment to Pakistan. He said the trade between Pakistan and Russia has increased by 46%. Speaking about Pakistan and India relations, Lavrov said Moscow welcomes the normalization talks between the two countries. The Russian foreign minister said the need to establish the state of Palestine is important to prevent escalation in the Middle East. Lavrov said Pakistan and Russia agreed to further facilitate the warring parties in Afghanistan to reach an agreement. Qureshi said Pakistan is keen to build a strong multi-dimensional relationship with Russia as a priority. He added, there is new approach and a new mindset in Pakistan for Russia because of the geographical proximity. Qureshi maintained Pakistan is committed to energy projects with Russia, including the North-South gas pipeline. He said the two sides have agreed to maintain momentum, high-level contact. For this, he said the first meeting of Intergovernmental Commission will be held in Moscow to help boost bilateral trade. Lavrov will also call on Prime Minister Imran Khan and Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa during his two-day visit. Now, in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, police have banned media from covering the inhumane cordon and search operations. The Indian-occupied forces used these operations to commit extrajudicial murders of innocent, unarmed Kashmiris. In a statement, the police chief asked media not to interfere in the duty of armed forces at the operation site. Meanwhile, Indian troops have launched the so-called search operations in Srinagar, Shopian and other areas of the territory. The occupying forces conducting house-to-house searches. The operation was still going on till the last reports came in. Now, world powers and Iran have agreed to form working groups to discuss Washington's sanctions in a bid to revive the 2050 nuclear deal. At a news briefing, U.S. State Department spokesperson called the meeting with the deal signatories in Vienna as a constructive meet. Ned Price said it is a potentially useful step as the U.S. seeks to determine what Iranians are prepared to do to return to compliance. U.S. delegation head Rob Malley said indirect talks would be about identifying the steps that Washington and Tehran are going to have to take. In response, Iran's chief negotiator Abbas Araghchi says Washington must lift all sanctions. He said Tehran will resume its nuclear compliance only after verifying this. Araghchi added he doubts the U.S. has the same seriousness as Iran regarding the matter. Meanwhile, China called on the U.S. to lift all sanctions and Iran to comply with the deal. The Russian envoy to Vienna said the two working groups, one on Iran and one on the U.S., have already begun their efforts. The next meeting will be held on Friday. Now, Iran says its vessel, the Saviz, has been targeted in the Red Sea. The Foreign Ministry said the explosion occurred near the Djibouti coast. In a statement, spokesperson Saeed Khatibzadeh said the civilian ship was stationed there to secure the region against pirates. He said the issue is under investigation. Earlier, a social media account of the Revolutionary Guard said the hull of the Saviz ship was hit by limpet mines. According to a report by the New York Times, the attack was carried out by Israel, keeping U.S. interests in mind. Meanwhile, Pentagon spokesperson Commander Jessica McNulty said no U.S. forces were involved in the incident. A Pakistani Navy warship has arrived at Iran's Bandar Abbas port. The Navy's media wing says the visit aims to enhance regional peace and security. It said the PNS Asmat was received by Iranian naval officers and Pakistan's diplomatic officials. The warship also took part in a passage exercise with the Iranian Navy. The mission commander of the Pakistan Navy met Iranian civil and military officials. He conveyed the good wishes of Naval Chief Admiral Muhammad Amjad Khan Niazi to the people of Iran. Now, the Arab coalition says it has destroyed an explosive-laden drone launched by Houthi rebels. In a statement, the coalition said the drone was aimed at the Saudi city of Khamis Mushaith. The coalition said attempts by Houthis to target civilians and populated areas constituted war crimes. It said coalition forces are taking operational measures to protect civilians in line with the international humanitarian law. Hostilities between Houthis and the Arab-led coalition have increased recently, while the international community has ramped up efforts to bring an end to the 6-year-long war in Yemen. Now moving to Myanmar, where at least 3 anti-coup protesters have been shot dead by security forces in Sagaing region. More than 20 others were wounded. The violence erupted as troops entered the protest site in the town of Kale. Meanwhile, Indonesia says the UK will support ASEAN in its efforts to resolve the Myanmar crisis. Elsewhere, China said another of its factories in Yangon have been burnt. Official estimate puts the property damage at above $1 million. According to a local advocacy group, 581 civilians have been killed following the February 1st coup. Now in Brazil, more than 4,000 people have died from COVID-19 overnight, registering yet another record number. India has reported 630 deaths and this year's highest infections as over 115,000 tested positive overnight. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 2.8 million lives and infected over 132 million. More about the pandemic around the world in this report. The coronavirus crisis, lingering on for about 15 months now, is aggravating socio-economic difficulties across the world. Canada's Prime Minister says the country is facing a very serious third wave as its most populous province struggles to respond to rising cases. In the United States, White House spokesperson said Washington will not back a system that requires Americans to carry vaccine credentials. This comes as President Joe Biden moved up the vaccine eligibility target for all adults to April 19th, 2 weeks earlier than May 1st. In South America, medical students came to the streets against the lack of vaccines in Venezuela, while Peruvian doctors protested over work conditions. As Brazil's death toll approaches 337,000, experts term country's crisis as biological Fukushima.
Brazil is the epicenter of COVID-19 pandemic globally, and the World Health Organization recognizes this. Forecasts by some epidemiological institutes show that probably before July 1st, Brazil will surpass the 500,000 mark of COVID-19 deaths, rapidly approaching the total number of deaths of the United States, the country that had the highest absolute number of deaths.
Europe's drug regulator says it has not yet reached a conclusion over AstraZeneca, after a senior official from the agency said there was a link between the Oxford vaccine and blood clotting. Germany's drug maker CureVac says global supply chains for making COVID-19 vaccines have been disrupted by US restrictions. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has again condemned the unavailability of vaccines to a number of countries.
Scaling up production and equitable distribution remains the major barrier to ending the acute stage of this pandemic. It is a travesty that in some countries health workers and those at risk groups remain completely unvaccinated.
Australia says it will ask the European Union to release more than 3 million AstraZeneca's doses, testing Brussels claim it is not blocking shipments. Meanwhile, the death toll from COVID-19 in Pakistan has topped 15,000 and it reported more than 100 daily deaths again. The Health Ministry recorded 102 fatalities and more than 4,000 new infections overnight. The caseload has surpassed 700,000, out of which more than 620,000 people have recovered. The ministry said the country's positivity ratio stands at 9.6%. At present, there are over 64,000 active cases in the country. More than 3,800 are critical condition. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said the world has entered the fourth industrial age. He was addressing the 10th virtual D8 summit hosted by Bangladesh. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says the world has entered the fourth industrial age. Prime Minister Imran Khan will lead Pakistan's delegation to the 10th virtual D8 summit on the 8th of April. Heads of 8 member states will attend the virtual summit. The theme of the summit is Partnership for a Transformative World, Harnessing Power of Youth and Technology. The summit is expected to adopt a declaration and the decennial roadmap 2020 to 2030. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan will hand over the chairmanship of the forum to Bangladesh's Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says his main concern is to lift the people of his country out of poverty. Khan held a meeting in Islamabad with members of the United Nations Development Programme. Speaking at the launch of UNDP's Pakistan Human Development Report, Khan said Islamabad will be approaching the International Monetary Fund for assistance given the challenges posed by COVID-19. He said despite Pakistan's economy moving in the right direction, authorities see disruptions ahead. The Prime Minister said the service sector has been badly affected and will require incentive packages. Khan said the UNDP report will help Islamabad directly subsidize the population which is in need of financial assistance. Moving on, Malaysia's former Prime Minister is served with a bankruptcy notice for failing to pay more than $400 million in unpaid taxes. In a Facebook post, former Premier Razak Najib said authorities issued the notice on Monday, shortly after his appeal hearing. He described the move as an attempt to destroy his political career, as he will lose his seat in parliament if declared bankrupt. He said the timing of notice was linked to last month's decision by his political party to stop cooperating with ruling party in upcoming elections. Najib is facing dozens of corruption and money laundering charges over the suspected theft of billions of dollars from one MDB. But he has denied wrongdoing and launched a court appeal to set aside his conviction. More news coming up in this news bulletin after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. Russia says Ukraine's rhetoric over admission into NATO will further destabilize the southeastern Donbass region. At a press briefing, a Kremlin spokesperson said Ukraine's membership is unacceptable for residents of the region. Dmitry Peskov said so far there is no intention by the Ukrainian side to calm down and move away from belligerent topics. He added President Vladimir Putin has raised the issue with France and Germany. Now, this comes after Ukraine called on NATO to hasten its membership of the Western Military Alliance. Meanwhile, Defense Department spokesperson John Kirby said Moscow should clarify its intentions on troops build-up of Ukraine border. Moscow has also announced the start of 4,000 military drills across Russia in April. The massive exercises come amid increased tensions between Moscow and Kiev over the Donbass. Now, Amnesty International says Russia's Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny is imprisoned in conditions that may slowly kill him. Amnesty's Secretary General Agnes Callamard said Russian authorities are violating Navalny's rights. Callamard also said Moscow may be seeking to hide what is being done to Navalny. In an interview, she said authorities are imposing prison conditions that amount to torture. Navalny announced a hunger strike last week to protest the inadequate medical care in the prison. He was handed a jail term in February after a court ruled that he had violated parole for a fraud conviction. Now, in the U.S., witnesses in the Derek Chauvins murder trial say the neck restraint during George Floyd's arrest was unauthorized. Police trainer Lieutenant Johnny Mercill said officers are trained to use the least amount of force necessary. Mercill said a neck restraint is authorized only when the suspect is actively and aggressively resisting. Talking to the jurors, he said police officers are cautioned to be mindful of the neck area. This comes a day after the city's police chiefs testified that Chauvin violated department rules and ethics. The 19-year police veteran Chauvin has pleaded not guilty to charges of murder and manslaughter. Now, in business stories, the International Monetary Fund says China's economy is projected to expand by 8.4% in 2021. The latest World Economic Outlook forecast marks the country's strongest growth rate since 2011. The figure is 0.3 percentage points above IMF's earlier prediction. The IMF said effective containment measures facilitated China's return to pre-COVID GDP in the year 2020. It said many other developing economies are not expected to do so until 2023. The fund noted its forecast for China is much higher than other major economies, including the US. The Monetary Fund also projected that the global economy will grow by 6% in 2021. Meanwhile, European stocks are trading slightly higher as investors evaluate global market trends. London's FTSE is leading the gains, ascending close to 1%. The CAC 40 in Paris has edged up marginally as well. Frankfurt's DAX, Pan-European Stock 600 and Italy's FTSE MIB have gained fractionally. Earlier, Asian markets traded mixed, with Seoul's Kospi, Australian and Japanese shares gaining. Meanwhile, mainland Chinese stocks and Hong Kong's Hang Seng slipped. Now let's have a look at how the weather is doing around the world. with the weather update, we come to the end of this news bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.